Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you particularly because I was invited 5 years ago when this project group started, and I participated in an inspiring workshop, out of which I took a number of inspirations, and now I'm here at the end. I'm sorry to speak at the end of the day when everybody is already tired, but I hope that what I'm going to say is close enough to what you are working on, and at the same time different enough that you feel provoked. And generally speaking, I don't think it's a time in history where we should reassure each other that we are following the right path, because apparently there is no right path. So in that sense, I think it is about a provocation. I start with a vignette from a case study, and then I theorize what I think is behind the case. Was ist der Fall und was steckt dahinter? In April 23, more or less exactly a year ago, I attended a 5-day high-level conference of the mRNA technology transfer program, co-hosted by the World Health Organization and the Medicines Patent Pool in Cape Town. A large audience of scientists, corporate representatives, government and NGO people, press and television spent 5 days in a posh convention center in Cape Town, South Africa. On the 4th day, all participants had gathered at 8 a.m. sharp to listen to the WHO Director General, 3 African ministers of cabinet, higher education, science and innovation, health, trade and industry, and other distinguished guests. As we waited for the speakers to show up in the spacious air-conditioned high-tech conference hall, people grabbed coffees and started chatting in small groups as nothing happened. My 3 companions, 2 chemists and a molecular biologist from Wits University, we went there as a group, were networking with their colleagues from all over South Africa and the world. I decided to kill my time by searching online for the press coverage of our event. After a few clicks, I came across newspaper articles about some kind of a scandal. Before I could investigate the matter further, the eminent panelists, except the Minister of Trade and Industry, entered the room. The journalists became active, the audience fell silent, and the meeting began. In June 2021, the WHO announced that, following a review of competing bids by the Medicine Patent Pool, it had selected a South African consortium to operate a global hub in Cape Town, serving a number of spokes in low middle-income countries around the world, about 16 of them. The selected consortium, which was operational a month later in 21, included the WHO, the Medicine Patent Pool, the South African Medical Research Council, a private company with expertise in vaccine adjuvants called Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, and the BioVac Institute, a well-established private pharmaceutical manufacturer partly owned by the South African government. This consortium is led by Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, Afrigen in short. All key stakeholders were represented at this interim conference in April 2023 to take stock of the program's progress after 2 years, so to speak, and discuss future goals. After a remarkably brief welcome from the hosts, the Minister of Health took the microphone and went straight to the subject of concern, namely the puzzle, why are we waiting? He started by saying, we are not loved today because we took an unpopular decision. He began as a way to preempt tough questions and then paused to let it think. While I had only become aware about the said decision a few minutes ago through my phone, the other South African participants more familiar with the national health and pharmaceutical sectors had probably known about it at least since the previous day when the news came out in the press. The participants of the conference, however, looked unmoved. The issue had to do with a public tender for a 3-year contract to supply pneumococcal vaccines. The current supplier of the vaccine was BioVac, the company involved in the WHO initiative. And the partly state-owned company, as well as represented at the conference by its CEO, top managers and scientists. So this is partly owned by the government. It is the previous provider, and they are all there. BioVac was hoping to win the new tender, as they did last time in 2019. Yet, the day before the minister spoke at the conference, newspapers, as I just read on my smartphone, reported that the South African government had decided to buy the vaccine from the Indian company Cipla. This alone was not the sole reason for the unease and worries felt in the audience. The WHO MPP program selected Cape Town-based consortium led by Afrigen Biologics and including BioVac as the future manufacturer of mRNA vaccine and medicine. Everyone in the room was involved in this highly innovative project of global significance, which promised to be far more important to South Africa than the routine production of a conventional vaccine. It was expected that the Ministry of Health would award the contract to BioVac because of the novel venture, but the ministry decided otherwise. The minister's opening sentence had the effect he must have anticipated, as many attendees smiled. Those who knew the facts in advance realized that the meeting started late because the South African representatives must have had to justify their decision to the WHO Director General. As the Minister of Health spoke, it quickly became clear that those on stage had agreed behind the scene on a script to avoid showing any public disagreement in front of the television and the cameras. The Director General of the WHO, a global heavyweight, tried to lighten the mood with somewhat exaggerated gestures of approval and solidarity. As if nothing had happened, the minister was particularly at ease in this diplomatic exercise and put forward an argument that would be difficult to question. Public tenders in South Africa's democracy, the minister said, are of course conducted strictly in accordance with the Public Finance Management Act. And the government had no other choice but to sign the contract with the company that offered the best value for money, namely Cipla in this case. However, he promised that given the size and the importance of the WHO MPP project with Afrigen Biologics, he could ensure that the South African government reviews the definition of preferential procurement in the Public Finance Management Act in due course. Most of the scientists in the room could probably not fully understand what exactly the minister was alluding to, as procurement law is far from the area of expertise. The current version of the Public Finance Management Act allows for preferential procurement in situations that warrant a broader interpretation of value for money by taking into account indirect factors which can be shown to have a significant impact on the wider public interest. One such situation would be a national or global public health emergency, such as an outbreak or a pandemic. But firstly, the pneumococcal vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, so it has nothing to do with the main business of BioVac. And secondly, by April 2023, it was clear to all experts in the room that the time to develop a COVID-19 vaccine in South Africa and additionally to conduct the necessary clinical trials had passed. The pandemic was over and the competing vaccines and boosters were well established and becoming more and more accessible and also affordable. The minister's reference to the rule of law was hard to contest. Whether there was something else behind the decision to award the contract to Cipla, we may never know. What the irritation of the tender and the response presented by the South African state officials at the conference reveal is a set of tensions between access, ownership, the common good in relation to techno-scientific solutions, and global health. While the patent system, with its complex arrangements, is designed to ensure that investment in biomedical research and development remains profitable, international organizations and governments are also experimenting with institutional arrangements to produce innovations that can better provide reliable health healthcare to the greatest number of people around the world. These two issues were on the agenda between the lines of the conference. So this is a sketch from a longer story I'm working on. And now I offer a theoretical interpretation scheme with which I think one can go on. So I outline the problem and then I make a few steps in more detail. Modernity's question concerning technology is currently being controversially reframed in light of the given possibility of an ecological and social collapse of the planet. There is an atmosphere of terminality or finitude around us. And when I say us, like Nina emphasized before, I mean us here in the room. It is definitely not everywhere and it is not self-evident. It is in the atmosphere around us here and it was in the atmosphere around those in Cape Town now a year ago. The question today is no longer what technology is. Rather, it has become more practical. Who, what, when, where, why, and how to change technology's role in shaping the planetary future. In the rest of this talk, I will propose to revisit the old question of what technology is in order to gain a more specific approach to perhaps better answers to the 5W1H questions I just named them. In German, it's more elegant. It's 6W questions because how is V? At the latest, since the gradual beginnings of European modernity and its spread throughout the world in multiple versions, technology has increasingly manifested itself as a realm of mechanisms that operate according to means-end schemata. Modern technology is designed to endlessly increase performance, that is, efficacy, efficiency, and acceleration, and to thus enhance human capabilities. We can say modern technology has become a design for the infinite that seems to compensate for the finite human capacity in terms of time, space, and knowledge. This aporetic design has always provoked various critical and often radical questions. One of them was, where does the drive for infinite increases in performance come from in the face of irreversible human finitude? This question was formulated by people like Husserl, Heidegger, Marcuse, Blumenberg, Hans Blumenberg. At the end of the last century, when humanity had to realize, and when I say humanity, I mean those in charge to speak of the humanity by some standards, I'm not problematizing it here, but later, had to realize that it had been living in the Anthropocene or Capitalocene for some time. The fundamental question of the aporetic drive for modern technology took a more urgent significance. In the West, the general acceptance of this realization came rather late. Although for some observers, the role of technology in co-producing the catastrophes of modernity had already become apparent in the first half of the 20th century, like for instance Walter Benjamin. For those who became victims of modernity's technicized reach for the infinite, first in Europe, as Karl Marx alerted us to, and it is for my argument important to say first in Europe this happened, and soon afterwards throughout the world, as for instance Fanon reminds us, the primary question was no longer where this drive came from, but how to resist and escape it. As doubts gradually accumulated over the centuries and intensified in the second half of the 20th century, the question of technology was reformulated. The widely accepted formulation was now, do we need to change the design of modern technology to get away from the endless increases in efficiency and acceleration? By the end of the century, the various controversies generated by this question had finally been settled in principle and in some places. like, for instance, summarized by Stengers or by Sloterdijk. But this again caused different reactions about the modalities of how to do it. At the beginning of the 21st century, the remaining and difficult part of the question now concerns these modalities, which all are controversial. The modalities of how to undo or change the aporetic design of modernity's technologies are obviously entrenched with mechanisms of power. At the heart of this entrenchment is the following question that I will elaborate during the rest of my talk, and I illustrated it with my introductory vignette, how the making of mRNA technology is embedded in a network of power relations. So if technicization, the verbal form of technology, is about colonization of the life world as it was understood in the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, and the notion was coined by Habermas, but others were using it in a similar meaning before him, his teachers. So if technicization is the colonization of the life world, then it is a universal process. And one needs to ask what exactly this means in the context of my argument. If post-colonies strive for technicization for a variety of reasons, as they do, strive for technicization, one must ask whether the colonization of the life world in post-colonies is a Trojan horse for political, economic, legal, and cultural subjugation in a new guise. Now, not to answer the question is too big to be answered, but to find trajectories on how to go about it, I make a few points. Traveling technology and translation is the first one. The first starting point is the assumption that no circulation of ideas, artifacts, or technologies could possibly have a single origin. It is only through crude simplifications that technological and scientific achievements can be attributed to a time and a place of origin, sometimes even to an inventor. But none of these achievements, such as the insight of Galileo Galilei, Nicolaus Copernicus, or Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, would ever have been possible without an infinite chain of previous achievements, usually made long ago and in distant places. To make this point, Robert K. Merton famously phrased influential thinkers from dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants to dwarfs standing on pyramids of other dwarfs. The second starting point for my argumentation is implicit in the first one. It is that socio-technical figurations necessarily result from the flow or circulation of ideas and technologies. And this in turn implies that circulation is made possible by translation. In this sense, creative adaptations are translations that take place in the interstices between different fields. It's important that I first say fields, namely social fields, discourses, orders of justification, different time period, but also between communities, countries, regions, and continents as the last in the line and the least important. The translations connect the fields in new ways. Accordingly, to understand the role of technology, one would need to pay attention to the role of it in translation practices. Technology has been conceptualized as a procedure resulting from the entanglement of material, technical, economic, social, political, legal, cultural, and aesthetic features. Technologies and their significations, the meanings and set of rules that are always inscribed in them, can only be understood in their entanglements, since there is nothing like pure techniques or pure significations or pure societies. They only come together. Nevertheless, technology has and maintains its own logic. And this doesn't contradict each other. It's an own logic, but it doesn't appear in a pure form. It is designed, as I said, as a means-end scheme around a definition of effectivity. It therefore engenders a particular order of things that is inevitably normatively charged by the particular definition of effectivity. For a technology to circulate, it has to be translated, and in the process of being translated, it enters a new assemblage. It thereby acquires new meanings and new functions. In other words, when a technology travels, it is disentangled from its previous assemblage and re-entangled in a new one. The most critical point here is to establish a link between the technology in circulation and the technological and institutional environment into which it is being translated. If this does not work, sooner or later the technology will be abandoned. In this sense, and many have been abandoned, in this sense, for what distinguishes a good translation from a bad one can only be found in incorporating normative evaluations. Because it's impossible to say which technology is better in terms of its own criteria of effectivity, because effectivity depends on what is to be made more effective. So it's a normative by definition. In redefining the use of technologies, actors are guided by multiple and often contradictory value systems and justifications, with elementary assumptions about what goes into the definition of efficacy, how self-interest is reconstituted, and how it relates to negotiations about the common good. Another widely accepted starting point for my argument is that technology and society are not ontologically distinct entities or realms, but rather, to use the pun by Bruno Latour, society made durable. In this view, the technical is not the material basis of the social. The two are rather relational and mutually constitutive. Accordingly, society is an inherently socio-technical assemblage. To understand technology, therefore, one must look at the practices of doing socio-technical assemblages. To be sure, this position asserts that technology is not constituted as a set of devices designed for a purpose, freely determined by humans. It rather asserts that political and economic mechanisms such as markets, neoliberal logics of regulating access and supply, or power or states, corporations shape the kind of technologies that emerges. Yet the most important point is that these mechanisms do not determine technology. Agency is distributed between these different logics, and none of them alone are enough to make the world go round. They spawn assemblages with distributed agency that are continuously unfolding and remain forever open-ended. So that was my first specification of the attempt to outline a scheme with which we can answer the question which I raised. I come to my second, technology and routinization. Within this broad argument about the impossibility of invoking the technical without the social and vice versa, a more specific question is implied. This is a question of routinization. In the relevant literature, we find several terms to capture how routinization is produced by technology. I enumerate black boxing, closure, invisibilization, inscription, description, hinterlands, and lastly, suspension of sense-making. It has become a routine, a technicized routine. The sense-making is suspended, is waived. So for me, all of these concepts are relevant, but for my argument today, I'm only focusing on suspension of sense-making. For our argument, or for my argument here, the important aspect of what all these terms seek to capture about routinization relates to the practice of translating circulating technologies, and this will be clear in a moment. As mentioned, for a technology to travel, it must first be translated into a new context and then entangled with existing networks of technologies and institutions. It is here, at this point of entanglement, that the black box or the closure are reopened. The invisible is made visible, the description and reinscription take place. Hinterlands remain behind, and sense-making needs to start from scratch. It is here that the traveling technology can sometimes, through translation, become a taken for granted part of the life world, or become again a taken for granted part of the life world, can become a part of routine. Its meaning can be suspended again. That's the purpose of the translation. So, the second step was about the suspension of meaning by weaving a technology into the life world. I come to now I go into the detail of this point. Of the terminology concerning routinization, I here use suspension of meaning for developing the argument further. With Hans Blumenberg, I argue that technicization is an aspect of the life world. So this is the opposite of what the Frankfurt School had assumed, and it was written against the Frankfurt School. The first publication of the argument was in 1963. The point of this observation is that the life world is not only about meaning making, but also about renouncing the making of meaning. Or the other way around, it is about taking things for granted, deferring questions that would interrupt routine. And because this is the key point, I will go a step deeper into it by using a quotation which Blumenberg takes from Husserl. And now this is difficult to follow, so I'll be very slow. Technicization is the transformation of a formation of meaning which was originally vital. So there is a formation of meaning which is vital. In other words, people live with it, they question it, they share it, they argue, it's vital. This is being transformed into, now the sentence continue, it's a transformation from this into method. And the method can then be passed on without carrying along the meaning of its primal establishment. That's what we teach students when we teach methods, that they learn it once and then don't question it again but use it. So, transformation of a vital formation of meaning into method has the purpose to do away with difficult questions that anyway will never have an answer, or questions which interrupt the application of the method. The development of the meaning is not lost, it is put aside intentionally. And this process does not want to acknowledge it any longer in the sufficiency of mere function. So the result is a function by the application of a method. And in the everyday life world, this is the point, we are doing exactly this. With or without technologies, but with technologies, we are surrounded by, the obvious thing is the digital technologies we are surrounded with, and we are so happy that we don't every time need to understand what this app is doing. And if somebody is sort of doing it slowly, then others say, oh, this is a boomer or something. In other words, technology is one of several ways of achieving everydayness. And this is the punch against the Frankfurt School from Hans Blumenberg. It facilitates routinization, which in turn allows most mundane activities to be taken for granted and unquestionable. Technology aims to replace cumbersome and deeply unpredictable human efforts with more predictable and standardized procedures. The result is a life world stabilized by socio-technical equipment. The notion of technicization thus avoids pitting mechanisms that drive technology against those that drive the life worlds, which is what we learned from the critical theory. It emphasizes that we are dealing with an open-ended process of eternal entanglement, becoming, and metamorphosis. In this way, technology then refers to a particular way of world making, both in terms of constructing equipment to secure and optimize practical attempts to inhabit the world, and in terms of deferring the critical reflection of the implications and malleability of that equipment. In this understanding, an antinomy between optimization and reflection is the central characteristic of technology. So here is the shift. The antinomy is not here is the life world with all our romantic understandings, how we negotiate and don't strictly follow procedures, but we can talk to each other and to non-human beings, and we adapt to each other. It's a vital form of sense-making. And this is opposed by technology. And the argument here is, no, that is a false opposition. The real opposition is between waiving sense-making because we need routines, otherwise we cannot live, and reflecting again in another moment, and how to maneuver between the two. This antinomy makes the danger commonly ascribed to technology, that it will prioritize performance over meaning and ultimately extinguish the meaning of life. This is the artificial intelligence debate. It makes this distinction understandable, but at the same time it opens a way of dealing with it. So I come to my fourth point. A key question surrounding traveling technology asks about their value. Answers to this question can only be found by relying on a register that allows comparison and valuation. The challenge is that the evaluation criteria for a new technology cannot also be new, because that would lead into a loop. So to evaluate something new, you have no choice than to use criteria which you had before. The criteria must therefore be drawn from existing registers. These registers are stored in technological archives, and while some of them have greater presence in the collective memory, others need to be excavated from deeper layers of sedimentation. It is these registers that facilitate the translation of traveling technologies. So the fundamental precondition for the possibility to translate is the availability of a register, which is stored in an archive. While affirming this argument, I like to add, and here I come towards the decolonial in my title, I like to add that the boundaries between different technological archives are highly permeable and do not correspond in all respects to the territories of countries, continents, religions, languages, or fields of expertise and practice. But their main characteristic is that they cut across them. This was already formulated in 1934 by Mumford and repeated every now and again, but not seriously picked up. I argue that the technological archives form their own particular zones with extensions that depend on the history of the circulation of technologies. The extensions of these technological zones change as the spread and scale of each technology evolves. This is partly borrowed from Andrew Barry. Some universal foundations, such as the use of gravity, of fire, the wheel, techniques of breeding, gathering, hunting, fishing, and doing agriculture, are common to all technological archives. However, the elements are found in other elements are found in some archives and not in others. And this distribution also varies with the technology in question. While it is true that valuation registers are needed to establish the worth of a new technology as opposed to the market value, no technology ever refers to only one register. This means that the determination of worth is the temporary result of volatile and ongoing negotiation between several conflicting registers. This is borrowed from Boltanski and Thévenot. My aim so far has been to show how the unfolding of socio-technical assemblage is inevitably affected by the translation of traveling technologies. Once a new and promising technology has been shown to work in one corner of the globalized world, it will soon appear in another corner, and after a while some of these candidates, not all, will be almost everywhere. But a technology that has become ubiquitous is rarely the same in each field of circulation and hardly ever identical to the one that initially started the journey. It can only travel as long as it is translated and modified in the process, and as a result, a more or less different technology may emerge elsewhere, and later the same process begins all over again. To participate in technological innovations is to participate in this work of translation that involves the entire globe in various ways. And now these various ways are extremely controversial. The translation of circulating technologies, technoscientific models, is therefore an achievement that takes place between several technological zones. The between here is crucial. With each step of translation, the traveling technology is not only transformed and appropriated to a local context, but at the same time transformed to contribute in one way or another to a problem of planetary dimensions. In other words, translations always work in both directions so that a new translation changes all its predecessors. And now here I come to the final step, the crux of this translation of circulating technologies is therefore that when a successful technology begins to circulate, much of the suspended meaning remains at the point of departure because it is never fully inscribed into the technology itself, which is the thing that can travel, but resides in the relevant technological archive that cannot travel. In order to become interesting for another context that does not have a similar archive, a traveling technology must be recognized as being useful and become reinscribed with meaning found in this archive. It is this aspect of translation that opens an interesting space for changing technology, and changing it in the sense which I defined with saying what the problem is. So here's the last point, decolonial technicization. The use of the word to colonize in the phrase technology colonizes the life world has a different meaning than in the phrase Europe colonized Africa. Accordingly, and within this matrix, the word to decolonize refers to two different political agendas. The first is to restore what has been damaged or lost by technicization. And the more advanced, industrialized, technicized a country is, the more has been lost and damaged. Or more realistically, it is about how to prevent technicization from continuing unchanged, given the contemporary atmosphere. And more specifically, the first agenda aims to prevent the desired level of suspension of meaning from leading to an undesired loss of meaning. This is usually debated under the notion of alienation through technicization. The second agenda aims to restore the legal and political sovereignty of formerly colonized peoples. The two perspectives or agenda continue to exist as if they were separate at the level of discourse and political rhetoric. But at a closer look, they are deeply entangled. This becomes apparent when realizing that the agenda of political decolonization comes in two versions that have two opposing aims. One emphasizing independence through the transfer of cutting-edge technoscience, as in my vignette at the beginning, where it was all attention was given, the Global South needs mRNA technology in order to be independent from this shocking nationalism of the distribution of vaccine in 2021. The other one is warning that this is likely to be another Trojan horse. From the theoretical standpoint that I'm proposing here, it is important to look what lies behind this political rhetoric, to say both things at the same time, although they fully seem to contradict, but they don't. In practice, you cannot import, and why they don't? In practice, you cannot import a single machine. or a single technology like mRNA, because it has to be translated to work within a whole set of machines, which in turn only work as part of an even larger set of network technologies, including their indispensable technical, scientific, economic, legal infrastructures, and also a sufficiently uncontested place in a way that makes the whole enterprise plausible and trustworthy. So this contradiction is about nothing. It is a situational rhetoric. This translation practice cannot be captured by an image that shows a binary structure. You either do this or you do that. A more accurate image is one that shows a marbled structure. Trying to keep certain technologies out, or on the contrary, translating them into a local context, can have both negative and positive effects for instance, the understanding of the common good. Much of this is difficult to predict, and much depends on the context within which a technology is embedded. In most cases, the relationship between intended technicization of a life world, and that is the purpose of importing technology, to technicize the life world, and the unintended political, economic, legal, and cultural colonization is not an either-or, but rather this and that relationship. In practice, therefore, the question is usually one of how much of the one is acceptable in order to get some of the other. More generally speaking, the core question is how to create a zone of decolonial translation of traveling technology in which this assessment can be oriented towards the common good. And the common good, of course, needs to be permanently renegotiated locally, nationally, and internationally. And for this, of course, it needs an institutional structure that, again, involves a lot of technologies. The decolonial space required for creative adaptation is therefore an unstable and vulnerable zone of translation, easily hijacked and abused. It is not a space that can be established once and for all by a revolutionary act or a new global order agreed and signed on paper. The zone of decolonial translation needs to be constantly challenged, defended, recreated, and nurtured. And the vignette, which I read out to you at the beginning, was these moments where this is being negotiated, and the part which I was narrating was mainly structures to the power relations which were in the room, but a longer elaboration would make my talk even more about the time. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you had a good day, and I'm here for questions, but I'm not sure whether you are, so maybe we should not enforce it, you decide.